Thank you very much for coming. Today is one of our events that's part of the Masters series, which is a series of lectures we developed in the School of Art and Design for bringing high-profile creative artists here to speak to our students and also the public about their work and their kind of creative methodology. My name's Caroline Wilkinson. I'm the Director of School. And today I'm introducing Jane and Louise Wilson, who are going to talk about their fine art practice. I just wanted to give you a little bit of context because Jane and Louise and I met in Dundee in 2012 because they were holding an exhibition in Dundee Contemporary Arts. The connection being that Louise went to Duncan Johnson College of Art and Design, that's where she graduated from, so has this connection with Dundee. And they had the exhibition that they were putting on at the DCA was called Face Scripting and What Did the Building See? And it was based around their interest in some CCTV footage of from a hotel in Dubai where a Hamas operative was assassinated by Mossad in 2010. And they built from that an exhibition and became interested in face recognition algorithms and the way of putting makeup on faces to stop the algorithm recognising the face, and therefore started a conversation with me because I work in the field of faces and identity and recognition. So that's how we came to know each other, and that exhibition was also with another which was looking at some images that they took from a city close to Chernobyl, this kind of abandoned city with decomposing buildings and schools and libraries and swimming pools that had a kind of forensic scene of crime-ness to them as well, which was also another connection. So that's the context for today. We've done some work in the past. This is kind of a mirror of something that we did at the South Bank. First of all, they're going to talk about some of their work, and then I'm going to ask them some questions. But Jane and Louise, everyone will talk to you.
Thank you, Caroline. We're just going to start with a clip of the film, Face Scripting.
5 minutes.
What Did the Building See? So we'll just quickly give you a blast of
Evidence, cynicism, pessimism, any arguments, evidence, cynicism, pessimism, individualism. There are hundreds of thousands of people moving through the city-state. Who has watched them all? What has combined a single narrative account from infinite possibilities? Different characters arriving, exiting, transforming, disappearing. How can you register them all? This is narrative assembled by an algorithmic forensics based on the architecture of the human face. A taxonomy of eyes, noses, mouths, and the distances between them, sampling 2 human flows into the city-state, business tourists and construction workers. In this city-state, whether you are a tourist or a worker, you clock in and out looking at the camera. Algorithms identify individuals by extracting and analyzing landmarks from the image of the face. A strategically placed sticker, thick eyewear, a band-aid, all can break apart the architecture of the face. An analog camouflaging technique to avoid digital identification. Like all camouflage, these are attacks on form. Measurements of distance between eye holes, lower jaw, height of forehead, size of brain casing. These are diagnostic fragments of expression. The rest is trash to be deleted. An infinite number of faces, spaces, and their possible combinations. Doors, nose bridges, windows, eyes, people, pathways, flight numbers, corridors. Acts of crossing are also acts of recognition. State borders, much like boundaries of buildings and doors of hotel rooms, are thresholds. They function as filters of movement and as media spheres. A combination of sensors and archives that register and store information about everybody and everything that passes through them. If the archiving of police files and evidence suited the logic of cities of discrete buildings, this is a record of the interconnected interiors that flow between cities, Tel Aviv to Dubai, as if one city could be distinct from another. Office buildings, airport, airplane, airport, hotel, shopping mall, hotel, airport, one dead body. Acts of crossing are also acts of recognition. If architecture is an editing machine, the door is the cutting blade.
So you've just seen a clip there of the film that we created, a film installation. It was created in 2011, and it's a film installation Face Scripting What Did the Building See, based on the CCTV footage which was released by the Dubai State Police of the assassination of Mahmoud al-Mabhouh in his hotel room I can just about see, you can bear with us, in his hotel room January the 10th, 2010 at the Albistan Rotana Hotel, Dubai.
Sorry, I want to talk to you.
Are you all right there? Just a little bit. Yeah. Sorry, yeah, we'll do that one first.
I'm not used to using that.
Yeah. Yeah, yes.
Just use fraction or just a fraction. Is that good for everybody?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Caroline. So the subsequent voiceover text is based on an essay by A.R. Wiseman called Assassinations in Junk Space, and the voiceover text also included information transcribed from an interview conducted by Louise and myself with Dr. Thomas Hesseltine, biometrics consultant for Aurora Computer Services, a company based in Kettering. And the company had developed face recognition camera technology using infrared cameras, meaning an accurate image could be captured under any lighting conditions. The voiceover that we worked as who's delivering it is the Jordanian actor Nadim Sawala, who gave a brilliant performance. And the following is an excerpt I'd just like to read from an essay by Dr. Susan Shupley entitled Walkback Technology, Dusting for Fingerprints and Tracking Digital Footprints. She begins, in January 2010, Dubai security consultants ran a series of image sequences catered by closed-circuit TV cameras and phone calls made by prepaid mobiles through advanced computer algorithms to connect a trail of digital dots, which in the end confirmed that the senior Hamas military leader Mahmoud al-Mabhouh had not died of natural causes in his hotel room at the Rotana Hotel in Dubai, but as had originally been thought, but was assassinated by a large team of covert operatives. Nearly the entire hit was recorded on closed-circuit TV cameras from the time the team arrived at Dubai's international airport to the time the assassins entered Mabhouh's room. The cameras even caught the team members before and after, as they donned disguises. She adds, in the case of the Dubai assassination, CCTV footage from several separate sources was edited together, captioned, and then released to the world's media within a matter of days by Dubai State Police, thus transforming in effect the viewer and the global news desks into forensic investigators whose deductive logic would come to the same conclusion that they, the Dubai State Police, had named the Israeli Mossad agents responsible for the killing. The YouTube footage creates a real sense of collective mass observation, which is directed towards the effects through the visual evidence of collusion and through the cause of death, so that the viewer's conclusion is clearly that of a political assassination.
So these are just some stills of the from the CCTV of Mahmoud al-Mabhouh entering his hotel, exiting the lift. And these are the Mossad assassins after the assassination.
And a little bit, I'm sorry,
Sorry.
if you go to the first slide then, you see.
Excuse me. And then this is the hotel foyer of Mabhouh exiting the lift. And the assassins leaving. And here's just some stills from the film that we just screened. So I guess, in a way, actually, we kind of were very conscious of, like Jane had mentioned, just how the CCTV footage was screened. You can still see it now to this day on YouTube. And just how this kind of became a real, fascinating document, really. It's still there in 3 parts. So this became the basis for the film Face Scripting, What Did the Building See? And within that, of course, we were looking at, face recognition technology. So I just want to kind of continue just the text that Jane was reading earlier. That face recognition is a technology that detects, recognizes, and records people's faces within the camera's field of view. The technology is also known as intelligent CCTV because it can identify, verify one or more persons in any one particular scene using a stored database of faces. This means that it has the capability to identify and extract human faces in a camera's field of view, or in order to record them for future retrieval and forensic analysis by searching an existing database of faces and comparing them with the faces detected at the scene. So it detects people of interest, and it can provide real-time alerts upon detecting certain faces within a scene. Back to Dr. Susan Shupley, she says, it is interesting to note that in every digital contact, it continues to leave an electronic trace. Older forms of facial imaging technology that rely solely on 2D data capture have actually had a fairly low rate of success in matching photographic scans with database of images, because well-lit, unobstructed views of faces in motion are rarely produced by CCTV cameras. Walkback technology, by contrast, is a high level of synthesizing technology or a platform that can assemble and overlay different kinds of information data to reverse engineer a timeline and remap its multiple spatial coordinates. However, photography, for example, has always walked us back through time. There is an obvious and compelling reason that forensic science has relied so heavily upon photography to chronicle the exact procedures of recovery and testimonial. Photography has the possibility to go back in time and represent it convincingly. It is a technology of exact recording, and it is arguably also the exact same conceptual paradigm governing the development of forensic sciences. So the installation view next shows an installation of the portraits overlaid on CCTV. These are silk-screened and printed onto mirrored perspex, and the title of the work is False Positives and False Negatives. I hasten to add a title that we conceived of in discussion post-op discussion with Caroline, who told us, much to our surprise, that there were no positive positives, but only false positives and false negatives. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, we thought this was extraordinary, of course. So this is, in algorithms of identification. So in 2012, and also, Caroline also mentioned to us that actually, for a CCTV operator, the Home Office legislation on that says that per CCTV operator, there must not be more than 16 monitors. So we made a bank of 16 with the wonderful DCA print studios, and that was a great sort of work to collaborate on with them. I think we've got some details of these, but actually interesting, I think, just to think of talking about, back to a bank of 16 images, which corresponds to the maximum number of camera images per operator. The Home Office guidance notes for the procurement of CCTV for public safety, as performance may be reduced when the number of camera views are increased. 16 is the absolute maximum. So the goal of CV Dazzle is to break apart the gestalt of the face or an object, and to make it undetectable to computer vision algorithms, in particular face detection. The name directly derived, this is CV Dazzle, Dazzle camouflage, is derived from a type of camouflage in World War I that was termed Dazzle. It was essentially a form of military camouflage, a paint scheme or schemata that was used on ships during World War I, and to a lesser extent in World War II, when, after the advances of the development of sonar and radar, Dazzle camouflage became obsolete. It was credited to the artist Sir Norman Wilkinson. It consisted of a complex pattern of geometric shapes in contrasting colours and interrupting and intersecting with each other. Dazzle didn't conceal the ship as such, but it would make it difficult for the enemy to estimate its type, speed and heading. The idea was to disrupt the visual rangefinders used for naval artillery, so that the purpose was one of confusion rather than of concealment, and it was an effective means of disguise. I would like to quote now from an email exchange with Professor Caroline Wilkinson, who we were fortunate enough to meet back in 2012. She says, "The surveillance and identification of people from CCTV footage by observers and by computers is one of the most recent advances in security and crime prevention. Your use of Dazzle makeup to confuse the automated face recognition systems points to the flaws in an automated system. That is, it is a pattern recognition rather than any understanding of the face, and that human observers are used more often for surveillance as they are not fooled by the surface of pattern, and can interrupt the shape of the face, even with makeup. I also like the clash, she just goes on, between the forensic detail of the footage from the room with the lack of clarity and the detail in the CCTV footage.
Thanks, Caroline. So just screening, these are the individual heads, the individual portraits of which there was a sequence of 8. And we printed obviously the heads with the dazzle, camouflage, the portraits, but also onto the screen grabs from the CCTV. So you can see the key moments arriving. This is obviously the point where they're leaving after they've after the execution, and in the hotel, Mahmoud now first arriving at the Albustan, his last known sighting when he returns to his room, and the assassins are following him. So anyways, there was a key sequences that we used for the heads to then be mounted onto.
But whilst this was actually, as Caroline said, it was two bodies of work that we were showing at the DCA. The one was the installation of face scripting, what to the building C, but we were also showing a series of photographic works, large format works, that we'd made in Pripyat, which was the former workers' town, just outside of Chernobyl. It sort of was at the time referred to as Atomgrad City. And just to give a little bit of a context, we were invited back in 2010 to come out with the possibility that we might make a work in response to what would then be the following year, the 25th anniversary of the Chernobyl incident. So we made a trip there in summer of 2010, and I just wanted to kind of say that actually what I wanted to show here was just a series of slides from the Kiev National Film Archive of images that were taken in the immediate aftermath.
So this is the evacuation from Kiev. Okay. So yes, so just to add, so in 2010 we visited Ukraine, and we were invited to look at the abandoned site of the Chernobyl nuclear reactor plant and the exclusion zone surrounding it. Whilst we were there, we visited the town of Pripyat, which was built in the early 1970s under the former Soviet Union to house the Chernobyl factory workers, known as Atomgrad, or Atom City. This once thriving new town had lain abandoned and contaminated for the last 25 years. We felt strongly that the most appropriate way for us to document Pripyat would be through a series of still photographic works, because it seemed the only way to show the extent of the aftermath and the physical destruction and deterioration of the town was through a hyperreal detail offered at large format photography, using the recurring motif of the yardstick placed within each image.
So can I just pause a minute, just 1 second, just to say that these images here obviously were from the Kiev archive, but that when Jane mentions, just to give a bit of background context as to why we were using this yardstick measure in the images, which you will see in a moment, is we had done a residency in the Cubic Archive in 2008, Stanley Cubic Archive, and there we were found a whole body of work relating to the Ealing Film Studios archive. And there they had images taken from the 30s and 40s of post-war, during the war, but also images that were just, contained one single yardstick, which acted as a measure for architectural scale, for set building, but also it was kind of a forensic detail.
Coming back to how we chose to photograph, using the recurring motif of the yardstick placed within each of the interiors, there was a desire to make conscious the act of entering and photographing the spaces. So basically, we wanted it to place them there as a way to kind of show that it encourages you to step back into the past, into the empty man-made spaces, yet the yardsticks as a means of measurement had now fallen into disuse, much like the buildings themselves, playing with notions of association and memory on material fact, and on that which is recorded, measured, articulated, and analysed. So the work explores, in a way, we were hoping the work explores the thematics of dark tourism, using the yardstick as a forensic and literal measure that could act as a register for the viewer. And again, Caroline very kindly commented on the photographs. The Chernobyl images have a resonance with me in relation to forensic decay, the loss of evidence through time, and I can relate the gradual decay of the buildings and the personal effects, evidence of life, to the decay of the human body, so that detail erodes. It becomes more difficult to visualize the living and only shadows of people are left. But you can imagine the original grandeur and life and pride of the building, even within only the decayed remains. So it was a very interesting, powerful way to kind of reinterpret the idea of the building, but also through the idea of seeing it as a body, as a skin, as a surface, because of course when people look at these images, I think they think, if we go back straight to the next play, I think they think that, I think they think that it's been due to an explosion, that's why it's the damages, because it does look like fire damage, but actually it's water damage because they've been constantly hosed to get rid of any radioactive dust which is on the surface of the interior of the buildings. So this is what you're seeing, is you're seeing water damage in effect.
But I think whilst we were there, we also managed to make some interviews, didn't we? So we not only went to the Kiev National Film Archive, but we also interviewed various individuals who had survived the aftermath, or survived the event in a way, but also had been proactive in the clean-up operation. I guess some of the students here may or may not remember, some, maybe I'm too young to remember 1986. Certainly I remember it, and Jay remembers it. I remember thinking at the time that, there was this kind of, obviously after the result of this explosion, there was this nuclear cloud. It was a kind of radioactive cloud that was traversing across Europe and Northern Europe, and possibly coming to, in fact did in the end come to the British coast as well. So this was a really, for us it was a really kind of, interesting spectre that you grew up with. So we were fascinated when we were invited to go back and film or photograph in Chernobyl, to actually make the visit in 2010. And this is just an image that we interviewed an agronomist here, or agriculturalist here, who was showing us actually just what the radioactive cloud would look like.
Yeah, he also explained that probably the radiation would be, well, obviously their soil would be contaminated, and it would be for 300 years plus. So it's obviously not going to be something that's going to be removed in our lifetime, or in several lifetimes.
So I think, moving swiftly on, these are just the other images that were of the installation views of the photographs as they were shown at the DCA. So phase scripting goes on one side of the building, through the partition, and then we have the images of the Chernobyl work, so the Atomgrad series on the other side. And the sculpture that's in the centre is based on a studio work by Alexander Rodchenko. He made in Popova studio. It's actually in the collection of, I think, the Tate, but it's the original is 2 feet by 3 feet by 4 feet, and we kind of expanded this to 3 meters by 4 meters by 2 meters, and made the design. His was in wood. We made it from Madeira wood and of measures. So there are 52 measures, and this work is called All Together. And it sort of seemed to kind of speak about this failure of utopian, that kind of utopian modernist ideal, in a sense, to put that in the context of Atomgrad, this new city, actually in the ruin, a modernist ruin. So here are some installation views of how this was shown.
So just to add, on our return to Chernobyl, we undertook, again, research into the Kiev State Film Archive, where we viewed the Chernobyl, a chronicle of difficult weeks, made by the Ukrainian filmmaker Vladimir Shevchenko in the days immediately following the disaster. The film is an extraordinary close-up record of the efforts to contain and clear up the disaster, but it is also a compelling document of the physical effects of radiation on film. When Shevchenko first processed his film, he noticed that portions of it were heavily pockmarked and affected by static interference. He mistakenly thought that this interference was caused by a faulty film stock. However, when he subsequently played the film back on his Steinbeck, he heard sound alongside the image and realised that each time the image deteriorated, it coincided with the sound of the Geiger counter. So there was no fault with the processing. Shevchenko had captured the effect of radiation on film for the first time. And to quote Susan Shukley, again, she says in her essay, "The most dangerous film in the world." Arguably, what is fascinating about Shevchenko's film is its transformation from a conventional documentary or benign media artifact into a radioactive fossil through the mysterious intercession of an invisible agent. So our fascination with the Shevchenko film is that by capturing the effects of radiation directly onto the film stock, it becomes an event itself.
So I just want to show some images here that actually in March of that year we actually went back and we interviewed the surviving film crew who had worked with Shevchenko. Unfortunately, Shevchenko died 8 months after filming the cleanup operation of dispersed radiation, and it was kind of really interesting to go back and film the 3 remaining members of the film crew who told us that the camera, which was a Russian Bolex, it was called a Konvas Avtomat, had been so, the body was so irradiated that in fact it had to be removed 2 years after the filming. They'd stored it in the Kiev Film School, and the camera was removed 2 years after filming, as I said, and buried on the outskirts of Kiev.
I think also what drew first alarm bells was the fact that there was a technician who worked there in the building who regularly basically just monitored the equipment and obviously looked after it and maintained it. And he also died from leukemia, and he'd been nowhere near the reaction site. Sorry, he'd been nowhere near the zone. And so there was something then where I think people began to look at where this was seeping in, and it was something in the camera that he'd been having.
So these are images of the site, which is called Karagovo, and you can see this is where the all the equipment that was used in the cleanup operation, helicopters, bulldozers, everything was buried in this site, including the camera, and it's buried under concrete and lead in one of these containers. So that's what's going to be.
Looking very jolly.
And that's a camera, we checked, but
they swapped everything.
But I think essentially this was kind of deemed more radioactive than Pripyat, where we filmed. Of course, because it was storing radioactive waste. But we were given initially when we went there, we were told we could film safely for a day there, and being kind of quite sort of prudent, we just thought, well, actually we just need 1 or 2 shots, so we actually filmed there for 2 hours in fact, so it wasn't very long. And then I think just to sort of round up for now, maybe we'll show a final clip if that's all right, Caroline, and we can sort of do a discussion. I just want to not maybe 2 minutes. Yeah, okay, maybe 2 minutes. Okay, cool, thanks. Thank you. And it was just to say that whilst we were there, we'd also made a project on Orford Ness. And we wanted to kind of include images of an installation we made of measures that were placed in situ, cast aluminium measures on inside the labs that were in a former MOD site off the Suffolk coast in the UK. So this was very much something that was part of the UK Cold War past, and nuclear, exactly. And these were used as chambers that were used for, I guess, vibration testing for the casement of the H-bomb. And
Lab 2 also had one of the most powerful centrifuges in the world of its time, so that was constructed
actually on awkwardness, and it's partly because of all of those vibration testings and being able to kind of monitor a lot of this material and this data that they were able to develop this centrifuge. And basically the centrifuge was unique because it was a way of creating, enriching uranium rather, but using it with a process which involved a centrifuge rather than the much more expensive diffusion method.
So just to give you an idea,
it was very, very significant to a nuclear development.
Sorry, excuse me.
Yeah.
So just to give you an idea, this was an installation view of one of the sculptures, which were the cast aluminium measures. This is actually the same measure that was shown at the Whitworth Art Gallery, so you get an idea of what this vibration chamber, the scale of it was. This is an image of Shevchenko with a compass aftermath. This is a cast that we made when we showed at Whitworth of a compass aftermath camera bought on eBay, I hasten to add. And this is how it was shown with the film.
So we couldn't get the original.
Yeah, and with the subsequent film again, another measure. These are some stills. And I think what we might do now is just do a screening very quickly of,
Of the tray.
just
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, first master.
In block 4, I was suddenly shocked by how quiet it was. Normally, there'd be equipment, vibrations, but there was just a complete and deafening silence.
When shooting aerial footage, decaying radioactive particles moved through the exterior casing of the movie camera. Shevchenko's camera had become an actual lethal weapon, requiring its immediate decommissioning and disposal.
Great, thank you.
So the first question I wanted to ask you really was about your methodology. So how do you work your way through a project? Is it have logical steps or is it more fluid?
I think it's always more fluid. I think you always, I mean, like any creative process, you don't always know what you're going to end up with when you start. And I think that's kind of, as it evolves, you realise, you know, that you find out more information or you discover other things, and it just is much more the journey than it is something as a kind of, you know, clear cut.
I think that's true. I think that, I suppose for us, what the exciting bit is actually not knowing what the outcome will be in a way.
Yeah.
So it is fluid in that sense. Yes.
And how do you work together? So your sisters, your collaborators, do you ever disagree over the direction you want to take, or do you just follow each other?
Well, I hope we don't just follow each other. I'm sure we do have a lot of discussion, but and disagreement and agreement within that as well. But generally speaking, I would say that actually the one that kind of wins with the most convincing argument is normally the one where you just sort of think, actually, I find that really fascinating and interesting, and that, you know, and then in that sense, the ego is just sort of, it doesn't matter whose idea it is. Basically, it's just, actually, that's really interesting. That's, you know,
Yeah.
So I think hopefully it's in the cause of producing an interesting work.
Yeah,
And not, you know.
which ultimately is something we've done together. So
Yeah. As equal partners, I feel like. can't imagine working with my sister. That's the only thing. I think it would be a recipe for disaster. So you clearly do it very well.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Because I think if you sort of felt like you were sort of, you know, I suppose there is an equal partnership to a degree. Yes, that there is, but I think it's actually really interesting because it's kind of knowing when to kind of recognise the other person's absolutely right and enjoying that and celebrating that and wanting to see that as well. You know.
So I don't know if people know, but Jane and Louise are identical twins. They both studied fine art at art school, but Louise went to Dundee to Duncan of Johnson, and Jane stayed in Newcastle. Is that right?
Yeah.
And they did connected projects for your end of year final projects. So I wanted to ask you about that really. Did you naturally collaborate even when you were in different cities, or did you kind of reach that towards the end of your study as a way of kind of connecting with each other?
I think we were always in conversations, and we were always sharing that space together, even being the only two that did art A level at school, you know, that's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, we'd always kind of been making art together. I don't think it was something that was a very, I mean, in a way, separating at different courses. I think it was partly because I really wanted to go to the college in Newcastle, and Louise really liked the energy up in Dundee, which was why we sort of separated. But I think it was, in a way, it was a moment where I think we both could develop a practice, but I think we were always in a parallel, you know, it was always running parallel, that you were having those discussions and that you were seeing what each other was doing, and in a way that kind of fed into work that I suppose initially we were using each other as models, or as, you know, to try and, you know, kind of create certain mise-en-scenes and scenarios that we did, and we staged more and more elaborate things. But again, it was very much something that initially we didn't see that as the work that would be what we'd be representing ourselves with. It was only that often in tutorials people would look at it and go, well, actually that looks like that's possibly the most interesting thing that you're doing.
Who's got this?
Yeah, so you were also kind of, you know, a little bit kind of, you know, uncertain, but it was also something that you never doubted. You just did it. You were doing it. It wasn't something you kind of weren't going to not do, basically. Right. You were definitely going to keep it going.
Yeah. So that then leads on to another question. So I know we were talking last night. This came out of a question from my daughter about being an artist.
I just want to add as well, actually it culminated in us creating these 2 degree shows that ran simultaneously.
They were identical.
Yeah.
So we had the 2 bodies of work, one in Dundee and one in Newcastle. We produced 2 of everything as it was a reproductive process in terms of the photographic.
Yeah.
And they ran concurrently, and so it meant also that the colleges had to collaborate.
Yeah. That must have been interesting.
Well, I guess it just sort of meant that if they passed one and they failed the other, they were assessing the same work.
Yeah.
So it kind of had that potential, you know.
Yeah. So that then leads me on to the question of and being an artist. I know we spoke about this a little bit last night. So do you think that creative art is something we can all do and we can dip in and out of? Or do you think that you need to have a burning desire to be an artist for that to be the important element?
Well, of course, I think, you know, it's a strange idea to have a burning desire. I think just basically artists, or perhaps making that decision exclusively to kind of continue in that creative way of thinking. I don't think that's something that's exclusive to artists. I think that's absolutely something that's in a population, thankfully. Absolutely, I don't think it's an exclusive creativity, but I just think that maybe you're more.
I mean, I think you've got to want to kind of because you do have to make certain sacrifices, and you do have to kind of be quite determined. And there's something kind of shocking to hear that, you know, what we said, we obviously are sitting here working together, 2 women. There's probably something like 61% of our graduates are female, and probably just under 31 are represented in any gallery. So there's kind of things like that where you see ratios like that and you think, well, what happened to everybody?
Yeah.
You know, so there are things where it isn't just a straightforward given that you kind of get to this position.
No.
And it's not necessarily just passion, but you've got to really be very focused with it. Yeah.
And that disparity of women working in art, because there's a lot of conversation about the disparity in science, but it's also true in art that the highest earners within the art world are men, and even the highest earning women are still £100,000.
What, the
£100
million?
Sorry,
£100 million. I think
£100 million
you're right.
pounds lower than their male equivalents. So how important do you think kind of female leadership is, and is it kind of depressing that in 2016 we still have to be talking about these things?
I think it's extraordinary. It's like extremely important, and thankfully we're talking to a female dean here.
Yes.
So we do have female leadership in operation, in fact.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's extremely important. I think we need equality above all else, and that still hasn't happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally within the art world, the idea of parity doesn't exist anyway. I mean, it is a very different, it's a very different arena to where you are in more regulated jobs. But I suppose it just has a very different kind of a set of parameters. But I think there is a question around education and art education, if there is so many women who are coming through, that what happens afterwards, and where do people disappear to, and why isn't that always reflected in representing women artists through galleries and through exhibitions?
Yeah.
So.
And also the issues that there are in the art world, recognising collaboration and partners. I know that you've had some of that in the past, and what's interesting right now for us, especially in Liverpool, is that Assemble as a collective have won the Turner Prize, and that's the first time a collective group has. Do you think that attitudes to that are changing, or do you think that's just a one-off?
I mean, it's funny because right now we've just set up a show that's happening at the Royal Academy, and it's part of their summer exhibition. And Richard Wilson, who's curated it, by the way, no relation, but Richard Wilson, the artist
for a long time,
who has curated it, is part of his theme has been to look specifically at duos, because of course to be a Royal Academician they won't recognise a collaborative duo. You have to be a single artist. So sadly we won't get the RA, but you know, it's this kind of thing. So he's obviously playing around with that. But you know, it's surprising how many people look at you and go, really? They don't recognise collaborations? Really? And you're sort of left there thinking, well, there's this very, you know, outmoded sense of where the art world is, and we are talking about artists and practising in this space. And, you know, it's surprising how much progress is done, and then realising how far you've still got to go. So I suppose, you know, you're very conscious that there is these kind of strange inequalities that happen, and there isn't parity, not at all.
Well, I suppose because there is this, maybe it's this confusion or this perception that, you know, art practice is something that's done in a garage or in isolation or in a kind of, you know, in an altered state that only one individual can engage in a sense. A bit, you know, like writers are absolutely, you know, themselves in a typewriter or a laptop, whatever, you know, and it's kind of, but actually, in a way, the creative process, as we know, so many artists work in moving image, or they work in other materials that actually, by definition of production, they're already in a collaborative dialogue with another person or several other people. Like you mentioned, Assemble is a collective, you know, producing work. So, of course, it's just, it's the nature of how, you know, what's exciting formally and happening and developing in art, language, you know.
I also wondered if your collaboration as sisters had any, I know you get fed up with people talking about you being twins, it isn't really about that, but whether or not that had some influence on you becoming interested in faces and recognition and identity.
I'm sure there is an element of that. I mean, obviously we're not perfect twins, and we wouldn't really want to be, but probably when we were younger we were very, very close to being very, very alike. And I do remember, being often mistaken for Louise, or Louise actually coming to Newcastle and
all the people I'd made friends with actually then approaching her and ignoring me, which was really unnerving. So, you know, there's all those kind of strange things. And just to add another mix to that, I actually did live with the artist Louise. She was actually someone I roomed with. So infinite identities collapsing in on themselves. Oh, brilliant. Yeah. So, you know, in a way, I kind of, you know, those sort of strange fusions and those strange kind of schisms are very interesting about recognition, completely.
Yeah.
But they're also very real, you know.
Yeah. I know that you both teach now, so Jane is teaching at the RCA and Louise is teaching at Newcastle. So I just wondered why now are you teaching, and what effect do you think that has on you as a practicing artist?
It's interesting because I think we sort of came to teaching, we always did a bit of part-time teaching, whether it was external assessing or doing other things, but not actually in a sort of fully regulated part-time position. But it was interesting because I think for me specifically, a moving image course was something I couldn't imagine 15 years ago when I naturally had graduated, that would be a course available that you could come and study, you know, could come and teach on, and that's really, really interesting to have that opportunity. But also I suppose, you know, you find that at a certain time you change in terms of your priorities and also how you think. And maybe you have a bit more now to offer than you did when you were younger.
And also it's kind of sobering to think that, you know, let's think, most artists who graduated, if they work full-time as an artist, can see perhaps, I think maximum £10,000 a year on earnings. So, and that's working as a professional artist. So of course,
That's
important.
that's the average. That's quoted by DAX.
Yeah. So, so of course it's important to supplement, and you know, teaching is a great way of doing that. It's also a great way of connecting with a younger generation. And actually, I see a lot of I don't know to say be too pejorative, but there's a lot of female students actually, which is quite extraordinary in a way. And I think, you know, there is a kind of you know, it's kind of obviously. You hope that's a kind of a nurturing potential there as a female artist to be in that, you know, teaching capacity, you know, to, you know, kind of support that really. I mean, it's extraordinary to think that statistic that you were just mentioning earlier, you know, that the number of female graduates and how many women are actually represented in that commercial system.
Yeah.
It's devastating really, isn't it? You know.
And do you think?
Hopefully that will change.
Yeah. Well, we keep saying that.
Yeah.
I mean, because you've been through education yourself, and now you're teaching yourself. I mean, clearly you think education is important, but do you think the way that education has changed now within universities means that we're limiting and restricting creative artists within teaching, or do you think that there's still room for that development of critical thought even within that landscape?
Or you have to think the latter. You have to think there's room for that development of critical thought. It's a completely different system to when we were at college. You know, there was no kind of health and safety, you know, fixation, etc. You weren't paying fees in the same way. I mean, it hadn't become so kind of, well, corporatized, but maybe there's an inevitability about that in a sense, that actually looking at a US model for education, which is, you know, what we're kind of working on in a way, but actually in a sense maybe that's good because there's an accountability there, and maybe there wasn't before, and you know, and in a way I think there'll always be that potential for creative thought, and if people are invested in teaching and supporting and encouraging the next generation, then yeah, of course.
I mean, the only concern would be, obviously, with the increase of fees, is that it would change the demographic dramatically. Who could apply and who could study, and that would be, you know,
that would be devastating.
Very negative. Yeah, it would be very negative.
I know that you, like me, studied under a Thatcher government in the 80s, and that had somewhat of an effect on our ability to study and what we got in terms of our study, although at the time we thought we were hard up clearly now it's just embarrassing to think that.
No.
But do you think that had an effect on you as people, as artists, that period of time and studying in that particular era?
I'm sure just being under the radar and thinking that, you know, there was nothing to lose really meant people just really did just, you know, go for it and take a risk and do those shows, and also to put their own curated exhibitions and to just take the initiative, essentially, because in a way there was nothing else there, or there wasn't any kind of possibility to be able to be represented in a gallery, because there wasn't many.
That's right.
They didn't even happen. So
True.
you know, there was this point of being very, you know, just being very proactive in terms of.
We didn't have models of professional artists when we were at college. We didn't have, you know, oh look, that's a successful. Well, of course you had successful artists, but it wasn't sort of something that felt attainable somehow. You know, of course, you know, figures like, you know, of course you had artists like Gilbert George, and you had, you know, many other, well, for those as duos, but just thinking in terms of, you know, now you think for a generation coming up, there are a lot more, you know, visible figures of artists out there, you know.
It's a different global art market, and it has a whole different parameters now. For a start, you have art fairs, you know.
And you have art fairs, yeah, it's true. And I suppose, you know, like Jane said, you know, those being under that, not being, you know, having the spotlight on you, or not having any, you know, being under the radar in a way did kind of make for interesting things to happen. I mean, in a way, but they also spawned interesting things, or they kind of made for certain things to happen. I mean, I'm just thinking of like Tyne International, that was, and Projects UK that started in the Northeast, and, you know, with John Bewley and all of these, you know, performance events that happened. I remember them vividly in the late 80s. But, you know, as a direct consequence, you have, you know, like now Baltic Centre for Contemporary Art, again, so you had, you know, that never existed when we were there. So there kind of was a good impulse at the beginning of creative industries, and I guess we were that generation that began to grow up with that in a way.
Yeah, and also to feel that more and more it's becoming challenged, that idea that even the arts can be part of an education system, or be part of your child's education, is something that's quite disturbing, is that the thought that you could go through to secondary school and continue on and not even be in any kind of arts encounter in terms of humanities or, you know, or literature or fine arts or anything. You know, you could just really focus on something that was more science and maths based.
Well, so that brings me nicely on to the next question, which is one of the things that we have in common is the crossover between art and science, and you've always looked at subjects that could be conceived as being within a science world, or taken a science angle on the way that you look at things. So I just wanted your sense of how you feel about art and science, whether you see them as different fields or whether they're just in the big mix for you.
Oh, they're completely in the big mix, aren't they?
I think it was interesting. I think, like, when we first were doing work, in the first time we went to Russia and filmed in Star City, and we met with, it was really through a British Council initiative, but it was also through Dr. Elizabeth Bell, who was the science, and she basically was a scientist, but she was trying to link arts and science together, and it really did, create a lot of opportunities.
It felt like there were more possibilities working with the scientists who are part of the British Council than the actual curators, etc., and the arts organisations. Unfortunately, I mean, of course, it's an amazing organisation, as we know, British Council, but, you know, like Jane was saying, you know, there was a real, conversation, exactly.
Okay, so just one last question before I head it out to the floor. Just what's next? What are your plans now for the next project?
Well, you can come to NEMA to Middlesbrough to see it in October. It's opening October 1st. So it's the new commission that we have, the Wellcome Trust.
Which we hope will extend our conversation with yourself and FaceLab.
Yeah, and who knows where that will go.
Yeah.
Who's got questions? Michael.
I guess I've been I followed your work for many years actually, and one work that I recall now when you mentioned this piece was the work you did in, I think it was 97, Stasi's City, which you made in Berlin at the Stasi Museum. And that work and this work for me really resonate in the same way as kind of coming out of this Cold War tradition. So I wonder if you could speak about your obsession or interest in the 80s and the early 90s and the Cold War period, because obviously there must be something about it that you feel connected to.
Well, I mean, we certainly, the first time we visited Berlin was in 1989, and it was in January 1989, so it was literally 7 or 8 months before the Berlin Wall came down. We had no concept that that was going to happen at that point. So that already then we were fascinated, you know. But I think going back to your thing about, you know, question about the Cold War in a way, maybe the Cold War hasn't gone away, and maybe we're still actually in a new situation with various, you know, with our present government in Russia. You know, it's sort of interesting to kind of think that actually in a way, you know, you look at that period from when we were looking at filming in former Stasi prison, you know, you wouldn't have had access to that before 1989. We actually filmed there in 1997, but you also think about that period from, you know, 1989 to 2001, and that sort of, or 1990, 2000, sort of this strange decade when it just felt like that was the end of the Cold War. But
well,
of course it was...
There was a kind of real opening out, wasn't there? Which was a real political thawing, because Glasnost, and actually interestingly enough you linked it to the piece that we did, the Toxic Camera, because partly because of what happened in Chernobyl, it meant that there was that thawing of relations, because no longer the Soviet Union could stay isolated from the rest, Western Europe, especially after the toxic cloud had emerged. So I think there was things like that started to unravel in a way, but also it did bring this moment of Glasnost. But I think as well you see that that's something very much that marked us growing up and marked our sense of political identities and understanding. It shaped you. And I think the same way that Chernobyl and the idea of a nuclear meltdown, and not the idea but the reality of that, and also something like the like the thawing of those relations, and thinking that, you know, okay, now there's no alternative to capitalism, there is just capitalism, that's it, there's no other socialist, you know, alternative, was a very kind of quite defining historical point.
Also, I was thinking about that point earlier, you know, Caroline was mentioning about just growing up in that Thatcher generation and having that. Actually, what was really interesting for us as well is I remember looking at a whole generation of, should I say, women artists like Cindy Sherman, like Barbara Kruger, who were actually, you know, making really defining work and groundbreaking work in a way that actually you hadn't seen those role models before as well. So, you know, I think there was something of a political context, but actually also seeing these women artists who were...
also within digital media.
And within digital media, yeah.
Anyone else want to ask a question? Okay, then I think I'd just like to thanks for coming, Jane and Louise, so much for coming, giving up a bit of their bank holiday weekend and at their busy schedule. So let's thank them again.